So what is an aperture? In photography, the aperture is basically a hole in the lens which lets light into the camera. On many lenses you can actually see the aperture itself when you hold the lens up. And changing the size of that aperture controls exactly how much light is passing through the lens and into the body of the camera. And you can think of it like the pupil of an eye. The bigger or wider the aperture is, the more light it lets in. And the smaller or narrower the aperture is, the less light it lets in. Now you obviously have the ability to change the size of that aperture and control how much light is coming in. You'll also often hear about a term called an f-stop or f-number when discussing aperture. And the f-stop refers to the size of the aperture at any given time when you are taking pictures. So the numbers can range from anything as low as 1 or 2 up to more than 20 sometimes. So essentially, when you have a low f number, say 2, this means the size of the aperture is very big or wide in the lens. And this creates the effect of one thing being sharp in the photo and while the other things are blurred. So when you have a high f number, then the size of the aperture is very small or narrow. And this will typically mean that everything in your image is sharp from foreground to background. I think the best way for you to understand this is to have a look at some real-world examples. I'm going to show you some of my images which demonstrate the differences between aperture sizes. In this image from my series about exotic pets in China, I used an aperture of f2.8. You can see that low f number allowed me to focus attention on the man and his pet while throwing the background out of focus. This is a pretty common technique when you want to focus the viewer's attention just on one thing within the frame. I used the same approach in this photo of an environment ranger during a patrol in Cambodia. I wanted to focus attention just on his face and try to throw the forest background out of focus to make a more interesting image. So to do this, I simply selected a low f number and zoomed in with my lens just to heighten the effect a little bit. In this image from Tibet, my aim was a little bit different. I wanted to make sure everything in the frame was in focus, from the bird in the foreground to the mountains behind. So I pushed the f number up to 11, which allowed me to make the image I wanted with everything in focus. Finally, this image again from Cambodia was taken at f8. You may not think that's a particularly high number, but I found that anything above f8 tends to ensure that everything within the frame is in focus.